Hey guys, Aaron here. Today we're going to be replacing the exhaust manifold on a Chevy Colorado. This is a 2006 inline 5 3.5. However, it's the same procedure for the 3.7, and if you have the inline 4 or the i4 2.8 or 2.9 liters, this will be very similar. So before we begin, let's go ahead and go over the parts you'll need to get the job done. Alright, so here's the tools you're going to need to get the job done. To get the stock hose clamps off, either 5/16 or 8mm. I'm using my impact driver just to get those hose clamps off. Works a little bit faster. 3/8 ratchet, 1/2 inch ratchet. I have a socket here to remove the O2 sensor. You can get this at any O'Reilly Auto Parts, and I'll include a link in the description of how much it is and the part number and everything like that. 13mm socket, a 17mm socket, and you're also going to need a 10mm socket to remove the heat shield. So let's go ahead and start with the first procedure. Now the first step is going to be removing the intake. As you can see, this vehicle has an aftermarket K&N intake system, so it's going to be a little bit different than the OEM stock system. Basically what you're going to be seeing is you can leave your stock air box alone, but you're going to want to remove the intake tube and intake resonator and your mass airflow sensor, which is going to be right here. On this one, it's kind of down here and hidden away. Just remove the connector, pinch it, and it pulls off. And then remove it at the throttle body. Don't forget your two 10mm bolts you have to remove, and be careful of the hose, which is going to be right under here. Lift it up straight, and then just inspect that hose for any cracks. Alright, so once we have the intake tube off, you can see we have a lot more clearance to get to the heat shield on the exhaust manifold. But first, what we're going to do is get your 10mm wrench or ratchet, remove this nut, and we're going to simply swing the dipstick tube and dipstick assembly away from the exhaust manifold. Just going to give us a little bit more room to get down to our O2 sensors. Alright, so I got a little bungee cord here just to keep the dipstick out of the way. It's going to help us get to our O2 sensor. Now I'm going to be using my O2 sensor socket. It's going to be really nice because this heat shield's in the way. You can't really get a wrench on it. Just go ahead and put your socket over the sensor, crack it loose. Should come off relatively easy. And then your connector's right up here on the valve cover. Go ahead and just disconnect it, pull it off. That way it's free to spin and you don't end up damaging any of your wires or sensors. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off, and then we'll get to the heat shield. Alright, next for this heat shield, there's two bolts you're going to have to remove. One right here, and then two nuts at the back, one up top and one down below. What you'll notice that most of the time they're going to be a little bit hard to get off, as they're always going to be in the heat and the element, so just be careful not to snap them. If you do snap them, you might want to take it to a welder where he can weld it back into place, or something like that. But I've been pretty lucky in the past with getting these bolts out with no issues because they are steel. So let's go ahead and get that off and take off our heat shield. As you can see, with the heat shield off, we have access to all of our bolts. I went ahead and removed them all, except for one. I just have one that's kind of loose right here. So with that one loose, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and go underneath the vehicle. Alright, so here we are underneath the passenger side of the truck. As you can see, this truck has a torsion bar suspension system instead of a regular spring or coil spring suspension. So you will be finding that in a little bit, especially if it's four-wheel drive like this truck. Drive shaft's right here, so the three bolts are located on the collector right here, right there, and then one on top. Get your 17mm, and you can go ahead and break those free. If you notice they're kind of hard, get some penetrating oil. Make sure they don't seize or snap off. I believe these are the OEM bolts. Not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure these are the original bolts. So let's go ahead and pop that off. After that, we can go ahead and take off our manifold. Alright, with our collector bolts out, the manifold is free to come out. Alright, so I got all the old gaskets off. Got the new multi-layered gasket here from GM. It's what you want to use. You don't want to use these because, as you can see, they blow out. They do leak after time. This has only been on there for a little while, looks like. But then here's our leak. So I'm going to make a repair here and try to fix that up until just a temporary fix until we can get a new manifold ordered up and replaced, get the truck back on the fleet. So if you're like me and discovered an aftermarket gasket's been replaced, what I like to do is just clean up these ports a little bit. You can either use some sandpaper, a wire brush, I'm using my die grinder with an abrasive bit. You can get these at O'Reilly's, pretty cheap. They work really well. Just try not to take too much material off. You will cause a leak if you do that. If not, if it looks like it's pretty good, just slap on your new gasket, you'll be good to go. Alright, so I went ahead and laid down a bead. Looks like it'll seal up. Not the prettiest thing, but it'll work. Exhaust flange is nice and clean. Let's go ahead and throw this bad boy back on. One quick note, when you have everything bolted up, just go ahead and get these bolts all, I think there's 11 of them tightened up. Start in the middle and work your way out when you're tightening. And one thing to note is that the torque spec is 15 foot-pounds. You don't want to over-torque these. These bolts will shear. I've heard about it happening on these engines before. It can become a real nightmare. They don't need a lot of torque because that multi-layered gasket metal gasket is really handy. So I'm going to get this thing back together, fire it up, and check for leaks. Alright, so I just fired it up. Seems like everything's nice and sealed, no more leaks. One thing to note, when you're putting your stock airbags back on, make sure the hose that goes over the PC valve gets on there correctly, or else you'll have a code. And also make sure you plug in your mass airflow sensor. Hope this video has helped you out. If it has, please like and subscribe, and check you guys next time.